The knock at the door was sharp, deliberate, 3 solid pounds that sent a faint rattle through the windows. Not a casual knock, not the hesitant tap of a delivery guy or the lazy thud of a neighbor stopping by. This was different. This was the kind of knock that carried weight, that demanded attention. Daniel Carter, standing in his kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee in hand, felt his grip tighten slightly around the mug. His instincts, honed from years in federal service, immediately registered something was off. Too early. Too forceful. His first thought was the usual neighborhood nuisance, Mrs. Calloway from 2 doors down, here to complain about his truck being too close to her mailbox again. Or maybe the guy with the obsessively manicured lawn, armed with another passive-aggressive remark about community standards. But deep down, he knew this was neither. Setting his mug down on the counter with a quiet clink, he moved toward the front door, every step calculated, his body language neutral but prepared. Years of training dictated one simple rule before engaging a situation. Observe first. As he neared the door, the voice came. Homeowners Association inspection. Open up. The words hit his ears wrong, like an out-of-tune note in a familiar song. Daniel froze, his brow furrowing. HOA. That made no sense. He didn't live in an HOA. That was the entire reason he bought this house. To avoid the petty fines, the endless bureaucracy, the clipboard warriors micromanaging his life. No restrictions on what color he could paint his shutters, no letters about leaving his trash bins out too long, no nonsense. So why were 2 supposed inspectors knocking on his door like they had any authority here? Something about the demand, not a request, but a demand, made his pulse tick up a notch. Keeping himself out of the sidelight's view, he shifted toward the peephole. Observe first. Always. Through the small fisheye lens, he got his first look at them. 2 men. They stood just a little too still, a little too stiff, as if they were trying too hard to sell a role they hadn't fully rehearsed. Identical uniforms, navy blue polos with HOA inspector, stitched in thick white thread across the chest. Khaki pants. Belts weighed down by cheap-looking badges clipped to the sides. Daniel's sharp eyes instantly picked up on the details. The badges were wrong. Too shiny, too clean, the kind of thing you'd order from a sketchy website that also sold prank diplomas and fake doctor notes. The tall one, Blondie, Daniel mentally labeled him, had his arms crossed over his chest, mirrored sunglasses obscuring his eyes. Too rigid. Too much forced confidence, like he was trying to intimidate through stillness. The shorter one, Mustache, was stockier, standing wide, chest puffed out. Aggressive. The kind of guy who wanted to be challenged just so he could respond. Daniel didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. They weren't from the HOA. That much was obvious. The only question was, what exactly were they trying to pull? Still not opening the door, Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here. A pause. A shift. Blondie turned his head slightly toward Mustache, as if waiting for a cue. Then, smoothly, he responded, "Sir, this is a mandatory home inspection. We need to verify compliance with neighborhood safety regulations." Daniel almost laughed. Safety regulations? Another pause. Mustache stepped forward now, lowering his voice, trying to sound authoritative. "Sir, you can either open the door, or we'll be forced to enter by authority of the HOA Security Division." And there it was. The moment a petty scam escalated into something dangerous. Most people would have panicked. They would have cracked the door open, asked questions, maybe let these 2 frauds take just one step inside, just enough to make it easy. Just enough to shift control. But Daniel wasn't most people. He was a federal agent. And what these 2 just attempted. That was illegal entry under false authority. His voice didn't change. "You got a warrant?" The question sliced through the air like a blade. Silence. Blondie's grip tightened on his crossed arms. Mustache blinked, too many times, too fast. Daniel could practically see the gears turning in their heads. Then, a scoff. A weak attempt at brushing off the question. "We don't need a warrant under HOA bylaws." That was the last mistake they would make today. Click. Daniel flipped the lock and, in one swift motion, swung the door open. The fake inspectors barely had time to react before they found themselves face to face with the one thing they hadn't anticipated, a man who wasn't afraid of them. And worse, a man who had the actual authority to put them exactly where they belonged. The two men stood frozen, the confidence they had just moments ago draining from their faces like water down a storm drain. For the first time, Daniel got a full, unobstructed look at them, and more importantly, they got a very clear look at him. Not a clueless homeowner. Not some retiree who might hesitate to question authority. A federal agent. His badge was out, held firm in one hand, his gun visible on his hip, not drawn, not needed, just there, a silent reminder that the law wasn't on their side. The air between them hung thick, buzzing with the weight of realization. Blondie's mirrored sunglasses didn't do much to hide the way his eyes had gone wide. He was caught. They both were. Mustache, standing rigid beside him, swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. His fingers flexed at his sides, tension rippling through his forearms as if his body was physically rejecting the situation it had landed in. Daniel saw it, the split-second panic, the flicker of fight or flight. They were deciding whether to double down on the lie or cut and run. Mustache was the first to recover, lifting his hands slightly. Not all the way up, not surrendering, just hedging his bets. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly, his voice carefully measured. "We were just conducting a safety check." Daniel stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate, controlled. Blondie, purely on instinct, took a step back. Just a small one, but enough. His back bumped against the porch railing, cutting off any easy escape. They weren't in control anymore. Whatever script they had been following had just been shredded. "You know impersonating an official is a federal crime, right?" Daniel's voice was even, almost casual, like he was just discussing the weather. No yelling. No threats. Just fact. But facts had weight, and this one hit Blondie like a hammer. His jaw twitched. His lips parted slightly, like his brain was trying to process too many possibilities at once. Run. Talk their way out of it. Fake a retreat. Daniel could see it all in his face. The wheels spinning, searching for the least painful way out. Blondie licked his lips, still hesitating, so Daniel pressed. "Where'd you get the badge?" The question landed like a slap. Blondie's mouth snapped shut. Mustache shifted on his feet. Too much hesitation. Too much thinking. Liars always overthink their next sentence. Daniel knew that better than anyone. Mustache's eyes flicked to Blondie, an unspoken plea for a save, but Blondie had nothing. He was still calculating, still searching for the perfect response, but there wasn't one. Not here. Not now. The scam had unraveled. Daniel could see it in their body language, the tightening shoulders, the rapid blinking, the forced stillness. Cornered animals, trying to decide whether to bare their teeth or back away. And Daniel was the hunter who had just caught them mid-act. "Look, man, we weren't trying to cause trouble," Mustache started, his voice shifting gears into the "let's talk this out" tone. Too late. They had already pushed too far. Daniel didn't even let him finish. "Let me tell you how this is going to go," he interrupted, his voice like stone. "You're going to put those fake badges on the ground. Slowly. You're going to keep your hands where I can see them. And then you're going to explain, in great detail, exactly how many people you've pulled this scam on. Because if you don't, I'll call for backup, and trust me, you won't like the kind of company that brings." Silence. Another shift. This time, real fear flashed across Blondie's face. Backup. That meant cops. That meant federal involvement. That meant real consequences. For the first time, they truly understood just how badly they had messed up. Mustache exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. His hands hovered near his waist, but he wasn't reaching for anything. He was stalling, trying to decide whether pride was worth a criminal record. But Blondie was already crumbling. He glanced around, searching for witnesses, looking for any way out that didn't involve handcuffs. There wasn't one. And Daniel knew it. He had seen this before, this exact moment where reality caught up to criminals who thought they were untouchable. The second they realized they weren't. The second they understood that the game was over. The moment the handcuffs came into view, the entire situation shifted in an instant. Mustache moved first. His hand instinctively went to his waistband, fingers twitching toward a concealed weapon, a last-ditch act of defiance, of control, of desperation. But Daniel had already anticipated it. His gun was out before Mustache's fingers even brushed the grip. The weight of the firearm settled firmly in his hands, his arms steady, his stance unwavering. "Don't!" The command wasn't a plea, wasn't a warning. It was final. A single word that cut through the tension like a blade, sharp and unquestionable. Mustache froze, muscles coiled like a spring wound too tight, every nerve in his body telling him to push forward, to fight, to resist. But his brain, the survival part of it, knew better. Knew the moment he finished reaching for that weapon, he'd never get the chance to use it. Blondie reacted differently. His hands shot up, palms open in full surrender, his breath coming fast and uneven. His mirrored sunglasses were gone now, ripped away by his own panic, exposing his wide, darting eyes. His entire body screamed submission. No sudden movements. No resistance. Just sheer, naked fear. Daniel didn't move. Didn't blink. His gun remained trained on Mustache, his voice flat and unrelenting. "Drop it." For a moment, time stretched impossibly thin. Mustache's fingers trembled. His knuckles flexed, his breathing quick and uneven. His mind was running wild, searching for a way out, for some kind of miracle that would let him save face, walk away, pretend this was all just a misunderstanding. But there were no miracles left. Only reality. Daniel's stance didn't shift. His aim didn't falter. "I won't say it again." "Drop it." The second command hit harder, stripping away whatever foolish pride Mustache had left. Finally, with a sharp exhale, he let go. The gun clattered onto the wooden porch, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent morning air. Daniel didn't move. Didn't relax. His weapon remained steady, trained directly on the man who had just come within inches of making the worst mistake of his life. Blondie, still frozen, let out a long, shaky breath, like his body was only now remembering how to function. His arms stayed raised, his stance stiff with terror. Now, they understood. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't some dumb civilian they could intimidate. They weren't walking away from this. They weren't getting some half-hearted scolding, weren't going to talk their way out of trouble. No, these two were going to prison. 15 minutes later, the scene had transformed. Daniel's once quiet street was now flooded with flashing lights, squad cars lined up along the curb, uniformed officers moving with the kind of efficient precision that came from years of arresting idiots who thought they were smarter than the law. Mustache and Blondie were no longer in control of anything. Cuffed. Defeated. Powerless. Whatever fake confidence they had carried onto Daniel's porch was long gone, shattered the moment reality caught up with them. Now, they were just two criminals in handcuffs, sputtering out excuses as officers dragged them toward the waiting patrol cars. "This is all a misunderstanding," Blondie insisted, his voice rising with panic, his smooth-talking con artist persona crumbling with every syllable. Mustache, desperate, tried a different approach, eyes darting toward one of the officers. "We didn't mean any harm." A weak plea, a last-ditch attempt at sympathy. It didn't work. The officer barely looked at him as he shoved him into the back seat of a cruiser. "Yeah. Tell that to the judge." That was it. The end of their scam. No more easy money. No more tricking vulnerable homeowners into letting them inside. Game over. And then, as if the humiliation wasn't already unbearable, the full truth came out. This wasn't just a case of two idiots playing fake HOA inspectors for fun. No, this was an organized scam. A months-long operation, a carefully planned con targeting the weak, the trusting, the defenseless. They had been breaking into homes under the guise of inspections, charming or intimidating their way inside, then robbing their victims blind. Jewelry, cash, electronics, anything that could be flipped for fast money. By the time homeowners realized what had happened, these two were already long gone, 3 zip codes away, counting their stolen cash and picking out their next target. And the worst part? They had gotten away with it for months. Dozens of homes. Thousands of dollars in stolen property. And they always picked their victims carefully. The elderly. Single moms. People who wouldn't fight back. They had relied on fear. Counted on obedience. Used false authority as their weapon of choice. And for a while, it had worked. Until today. Because today, They knocked on the wrong door. 3 weeks later, Daniel sat in a courtroom, his arms crossed as the final chapter of this mess unfolded before him. The air was thick. The kind of stillness that only happens when people know something important is about to happen. At the front of the room, the judge, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, flipped through the sentencing documents. Rustling paper. The faint tapping of his gavel against the bench. The only sounds in a room filled with tension. For multiple felony counts, including fraud, breaking and entering, impersonating officials, and attempted assault, the judge's voice was calm, deliberate. He let the words sink in, their weight settling over the two men sitting at the defense table. Blondie and Mustache looked nothing like the cocky con men from that morning on Daniel's porch. Now, they looked exactly like what they were, two men who had lost everything. Blondie's fingers were locked in a white-knuckled grip on the edge of the table, his mirrored sunglasses long gone, his eyes darting wildly. Mustache was worse. Shoulders hunched. Face drawn. He didn't even look up. Just sat there, staring at the polished wood of the defense table, like he could somehow disappear into it. Daniel watched them both. His face unreadable. But inside, he felt nothing. No pity. No second-guessing. Just cold, simple satisfaction. Justice was about to be served. The judge cleared his throat, his expression impassive as he read the final sentencing. 15 years each. The words dropped into the courtroom like a hammer. A heavy, inescapable judgment that left no room for argument. For a brief, stunning moment, the room was silent. No movement. No whispered conversations. Just the weight of reality sinking in. Then it hit them. Blondie sucked in a sharp breath, his jaw clenching so tight that the muscle twitched. His fingers flexed against the table, gripping it like he could physically hold onto the last remnants of his freedom. Mustache let out a slow, shaky exhale, his head dipping forward, his shoulders slumping under the crushing realization of what had just happened. 15 years. Not a slap on the wrist. Not a few months in county jail. 15 years in federal prison. The scam that had once felt so foolproof, so easy, had just cost them their futures. Daniel had seen this look before. It was the look of men who had nothing left. No way out. No last-minute deals. Just the cold, inescapable truth that they had finally lost. The judge's gavel hit the bench with a sharp crack. Defendants will now be remanded into federal custody. The sound echoed through the courtroom, final and absolute. The bailiffs moved in instantly, hands on Blondie and Mustache's arms, pulling them up from their seats. Blondie turned, his lips moving like he wanted to say something, to argue, to plead, to beg, but there was nothing left to say. No more lies. No more scams. No more getting away with it. Mustache didn't resist. Didn't argue. He just let himself be led away, his head hanging low, his once defiant posture now that of a man who had finally, completely accepted his fate. The cuffs clicked into place, locking their futures in chains. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching the scene with quiet, unwavering satisfaction. He didn't move, didn't speak. He had done his part. Justice had done the rest. As the two men were escorted through the heavy doors leading to their new reality, Daniel let out a slow breath. The weight of it all settled in. Not regret. Not second thoughts. Just the simple, undeniable knowledge that this was how it was always meant to end. These weren't just small-time thieves who had made a single bad choice. They were predators. They had preyed on fear, on trust, on the innate human instinct to obey authority. They had worn fake badges, played a role, convinced people to let them in. And they had done it over and over, counting on the fact that no one would push back. No one would fight them. Until now. Until they had knocked on his door. And that was the part Daniel kept coming back to. They could have chosen any house, any target. But instead, they picked his. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had spent months pretending to be men of authority, only to get taken down by a man who actually was. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, the sky a soft, cloudless blue. A good day. A quiet day. A stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just weeks before. Daniel took a deep breath, letting the cold air settle in his lungs, grounding him. It was over. The scam was shut down. The criminals were locked away. And the people they had victimized, they had justice. He knew some of them would never get their stolen property back, never fully shake the unease of knowing they had been fooled. But at least they knew, the men who had tricked them, stolen from them, had finally paid the price. And Daniel, he could move on. Another case closed. Another threat taken off the streets. As he walked toward his car, Daniel pulled out his keys, the faint jingle breaking the silence of the empty lot. He paused for just a second, glancing back at the courthouse steps where Blondie and Mustache had taken their final walk as free men. Then he smirked, shaking his head. Wrong damn house. With that, he got into his car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Behind him.